Okay, welcome to CS 456, the next lecture. I won't give them numbers. This is the lecture on computer-mediated conversations involving text. So before this, you would want to have watched lectures about conversations, face-to-face conversations, and phone-based conversations. This one will be about text-based conversations like instant messaging, texting somebody on a phone using SMS, uh, various group chat applications. I'll show you an example from GroupMe, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's get into it. So rather than make you watch me type, I pre-typed everything. So here is social interaction using asynchronous text-based communications. So just as a reminder, asynchronous means that we are not necessarily talking in a coordinated, synchronized conversation um, like we would on the phone or in person or over a video call. So the context. So we'll look at each one of the 6 elements of a conversation. Really, we started out with 5, but it turns out context is really important too. So I added that and numbered it at 0. So context. With text-based communication, there is no context. I can assume you're at a phone when we're texting each other back and forth, although that's not always true either. I do a lot of my texting from a web application because it's easier to type that way. So you don't know a lot about the context. A few services have added contextual cues to their text-based conversational interfaces. So for example, I believe on an iPhone, if you're sending text back and forth with somebody else who has an iPhone, it'll tell you that they're typing or that they read your message. But other than that, you have no context. You don't know their physical location or setting. You don't know their emotional state. You don't know their mental state. You don't know if they've read your message unless you're using one of those services that tell you that they've read the message. Very little context. Initiation rituals in asynchronous text-based communications tend to be very direct. So in a text-based conversation, we tend to just jump right into it. So sorry about that. That did not do what I wanted. Okay. So initiation rituals, we just start right on topic. None of this, hi, how are you, that sort of thing. Sometimes when older people initiate a text-based conversation, they will say, hi, this is Gertrude, or whoever they are. But most of the time, we just start right on the topic. Turn taking is explicitly serialized in every text-based communication medium that I know of. So we end up with speech bubbles that have nice, direct, clean, distinct boundaries between them, and that forces us to take turns. The one wrinkle here is that unless I have some context that tells me you've read my message, I might have a hard time knowing it's my turn because I don't know if you've read my message and you're just ghosting me or ignoring me, even though you read my message, or if you read my message and you just can't reply yet. So turn taking can be a little confusing because we have so little context. The farewell ritual, there usually is not a farewell ritual in text-based communication. Although in the conversations I'm having, I'm starting to see the thumbs up emoji as the farewell ritual for a text-based communication. So in the end, somebody will just say thumbs up, let's do it, whatever that means. But in many cases, especially if it's somebody that I know well, the conversation just ends. There are no verbal and nonverbal cues in text-based communication, although we'll add words that might help, such as typing out kind of like I've written there, and by using emoji. So emoji give us a way to communicate emotion in text-based communication. And again, in text-based communication, it all comes down to an impoverished context. I have nothing except the text you type. And so emoji give you a whole new set of characters for giving me some more of the context to understand your emotional or mental state, or to understand cues that might help repair a breakdown in conversation. And so when we have breakdowns, we have breakdowns. And again, we only get text, but we also get emoji too. So I'll just go ahead and add that now. Okay, that maybe wasn't as helpful as I might have hoped. All right, let's look at some examples of text-based communication. So this is a conversation that I had back on the 2nd of March with my mom. So I just texted her on Monday, the 2nd of March at 4:15 p.m., although that's not really important. But I just texted her and said, "Are you at my brother's house?" Didn't say hi, didn't initiate a conversation, didn't go through an initiation conversation initiation ritual, just asked a question. So and by the way, I had to ask that question because I didn't know if she was there or not. If this had been a face-to-face conversation at my brother's house, I wouldn't have said, "Are you at my brother's house?" Because I would already know she's at my brother's house. You get the idea. So my mom replies, "Yes." She has no idea what's on my mind. So I asked a question, she answered it. And then at that point, I know it's my turn to get to whatever it was I was getting to. So really, you could think of it as the initiation ritual was establishing context. That's not always the case, but in this conversation, it was. So I knew my mom was watching my brother's kids while my brother and his wife were out on vacation in Morocco, as it turns out, celebrating their 20th anniversary. The beginning of the month was such a different time. We actually traveled around the world, which we don't now. At any rate, my mom's over at my brother's house watching his kids. And so then right here, I get into the point. So just curious how it's going so far. When do they get home? We could do something with their kids on Saturday if you wanted to take a break. So so that's my question to my mom. My mom responds, I respond. That's turn taking. You can see the turns are really explicit. This particular conversation happened over the course of about 5 minutes because we were both doing other things. And anyway, that's how it turned out. So the conversation just ended. So I said, "That sounds good. I'll talk to Angela, my wife, and our daughters, and we'll see what makes sense." My mom said, "Okay." And that was the end of the conversation until I texted my mom back later that night to make some plans. So you can see the initiation phase in this case was about establishing context. Turn taking is very explicit. And the farewell phase or the conclusion phase, it just ends. There's no end. Although my mother did respond with okay to tell me she'd gotten this message and that she would wait for a response. So there was a bit of a farewell ritual, but it wasn't a drawn out sort of, she says, okay, I say, see you later. She says, okay, have a good night. I say, you too. It was just okay. And then it was done. So this was my cue that she got my message and that we could just move on. All right, so you can see in this conversation that we're using words in the text-based conversation to take turns, initiate the conversation, and to communicate. All right, now let's look at a different one. So this is a conversation on my family's GroupMe. So the first message, this is from this morning. You might remember this morning too. So this is a message from my sister. Earthquake, we had a good one. She sent that at 7:11 a.m. You might remember there was an earthquake this morning. So then she says, just now. My wife, Angela, responds with, felt it too. My brother responds with, that was intense. And then David responds with, yeah, here too. And you can kind of read the conversation. So the interesting thing here is that the initiation of this conversation had no ritual to it. My sister just said, earthquake, we had a good one. And then I don't know what her mental state was. I don't know what her physical context was. I don't know what her emotional state was. But she just typed it out and typed it out. And then my wife responded as well. And then my brother, when he said, that was intense, his use of this phrase kind of suggests his emotional context a little bit more, but not a whole lot. It's kind of like he's not panicked, he's not freaking out, but it's like, that was intense. And so you know that it mattered, but that probably everybody's safe based on what he typed there. And then my brother-in-law who lives, so we span from Bountiful to Orem in these messages right here. And so my brother-in-law is just letting everybody know he felt it here too. And I guess at this point, we're assuming that everybody's at home, but we don't know because the context is so impoverished in text-based communication. And then we kind of get into it. My first response was to put my favorite earthquake checking thing, which is the Did You Feel It project from the United States Geological Survey. So I put a link so everybody could put in their reports for citizen science. So I'm just assuming everybody's okay. For all I know, my sister and her husband are trapped under the rubble, and I'm sending them a citizen science link. That's how text conversations work. But that's not what happened. Everybody was okay. So I wanted to share one other thing about text-based communications, particularly during disasters. So this is later in the morning. This is 7:58. The first message there is from me. I said he's famous because my brother-in-law was actually on KSL talking about the UTA. He's one of their safety engineers, safety inspectors. I don't know what he said. I didn't see it, but that's what that was about. So this happened after about a half an hour pause in the conversation. And that's pretty typical of text-based communications. It's very asynchronous. When people have something to say, they just say it. And if nobody responds, nobody freaks out, generally. So I don't know what my brother meant by brother-in-law meant by here we go again. Okay, so here's an interesting element of communication during a disaster. So my sisters are nurses, except for one of them who's a physician's assistant. And so my sister Elizabeth is saying, Jennifer, are they evacuating the U? We hear that IMED is evacuating. This is Intermountain Medical Center. This is the big hospital in Murray. So my sister does not work, and neither one of them work at that hospital. So she's circulating something she heard, which is that this big hospital is evacuating. And she's asking my other sister if they're evacuating her hospital. It turns out no hospitals got evacuated. So one interesting aspect of text-based communication during an emergency or a disaster is that misinformation spreads just as quickly as actual information, partly because we have such little context. So this was 7:58. Nobody said anything. I guess nobody really had anything to say. And then at 8:33, my sister said all procedures have been canceled, including emergent heart procedures. I don't know if that's correct or not, but you can see she capitalized all. And so you get a sense of her alarm at this by her use of caps. So I feel kind of dumb telling you guys all this stuff because you are like fluent in text-based communication. What I hope is that by taking these 6 principles and applying them to text-based communication, you have a framework for reasoning about the strengths and limitations of this medium. Okay, so now you can think about it. So think about it in your own life. All right, great. So then my other sister, Dawn, comes in with, she just checked on Judy, who's our grandma. It's a long story, but Judy is my grandfather's second or third wife. And so we just call her Judy and we love her to death. But anyway, so she just checked on Judy. She's fine. And now we're starting to figure out how we're going to make sure Judy can get her groceries without actually going to the grocery store. But that's not the point. So in this example, asynchronous communication, big gaps in communication, a little bit of use of text to convey emotion. During a disaster, rumors float around and you have to be very careful about spreading them. And then a change in topic with really no bridging between the topics. Okay, so that is text-based communication. Again, very different than in-person, face-to-face communication, and very different than phone-based communication. All right, next we'll look at other forms of communication that have a computer mediating them. Okay.